Okay, this video is about Roy Jones Jr. Or some people nickname him as Superman, or some other people named him as the Black Superman. Whichever way you want to look at it and however you want to call it, he was, for me, one of the best fighters of all time, for me, pound for pound. The first thing that people will say about Roy Jones Jr. is that he didn't fight the best people around at the time. Well, the best people that were around at the time in the super middleweight division, not the middleweight division, the super middleweight division, there was Ben, there was Eubank, there was Collins, there was Michael Nunn. Roy Jones, he did what he had to do, but really, when you mention all those guys and you mention Roy Jones Jr., in his prime, he was head and shoulders more talented than all those guys. Yes, Ben could punch hard, and he'd bring the fight to Roy, but you know, the dazzling hand speed of Roy, Ben would have probably got picked apart by Roy coming in. Eubank, a counter puncher, threw punches when he felt like it. You know, not high work rate. You know, you can see Jones probably knocking Eubank out, but you could see him definitely outpointing Eubank. And of course, Steve Collins, the one guy who was chasing Roy Jones Jr., retired as soon as Kawasaki came on the scene. So, and I don't think Collins could beat Kawasaki, to be honest. And Collins was strong. He was bull-like. He'd get forward, kept coming forward. But he would have found that real quickly in that fight that Roy Jones hit very hard, and he wouldn't have been able to use those bullying tactics that he used against Eubank and Ben. Bearing in mind, when Collins fought Eubank and Ben, they're way past it. So I'm not discrediting Steve Collins, but just check the records then when he fought Ben and Eubank. I mean, if you look at the Ben fight, the two Ben fights, Ben was past it. The way he was throwing his punches, you know, it was a hook and a prayer, really, hoping he'd catch Collins with something. Even the second fight, Ben looked so disjointed and uncoordinated, he was finished. So Collins sort of made his name on some basic washed up fighters. So back to Roy Jones Jr. Now, I believe, for me, the fight that ruined Roy Jones Jr., or the fight that changed Roy Jones Jr. forever, was the John Ruiz fight, when Roy Jones was unbeaten and he stepped up from super middleweight to light heavyweight. Now remember, at light heavyweight he was weighing 175 pounds, and he had quite a decent run. He was still unbeaten and a good run in the light heavyweight division, beating Britain's Clinton Woods, for example, and a few others. Yeah, again, blurring hand speed. Went up to the heavyweight division. Could he do it? And he fought John Ruiz, who was a good-sized heavyweight. He's not a giant like the Klitschko's or Lennox Lewis at the time. He fought John Ruiz, and that was an interesting fight, and I find it quite a good fight. He was able to hurt Ruiz, he outpointed Ruiz, and it was a very exciting fight. And that fight, I believe Roy Jones weighed something like 195 pounds. Okay. Unfortunately, I think that Roy should have stayed in the heavyweight division. Much like Povetkin still in the heavyweight division and picking and choosing fights, Roy picked and chose his fights in the middleweight division, the super middleweight division, and the light heavyweight division. And he fought half-brained John Ruiz. Any fight he didn't really want to take. I mean, the big guys, you could have understood. I mean, some people thought that Roy Jones would have beaten Lennox Lewis. I'm not so sure about that. But, you know, Roy he had all the talent in the world. But my point is, he got called out by a man by Antonio Tarver. Now, I don't want to give Tarver the credit for saying that Tarver ruined Roy Jones or he destroyed Roy Jones. But think about it. Roy Jones came from 195 pound straight back down to 175 pound. First of all, I don't know how he came from 195 pound down to 175 pound, and if I ever get to interview Roy, I definitely would love to ask him first of all how he bulked up to fight in the heavyweight division, which was absolutely an amazing feat, unlike how James Toney did, just by eating and eating. You know, Roy was well defined, and then coming from £195 right back down to £175 or £175 to face Antonio Tarver. Okay, now the first fight, you know, Jones won. Some people thought that Tarver won it, and then the second fight, he got caught in the second round, got knocked out cold. That fight, to me, was the downward at the end of Roy Jones Jr. Because after that fight, he got knocked out by Glenn Johnson, and he's just not been the fighter since. Yes, he fought Felix Trinidad and he beat Felix Trinidad. Yes, he beat Jeff Lacey and some other fringe contenders, but he never was the same fighter since. And his legacy had been damaged by that afterwards, because then he went and fought Hopkins. Hopkins went and got revenge, you know, and then after that he fought Calzaghe. And you know, to me, Calzaghe got dropped by I passed it. Sorry, Roy. I well passed it. Roy Jones Jr. Okay, and then after that, he dropped Calzaghe, and in the first round, could you have imagined what he would have done in his prime to Joe Calzaghe? If he dropped Joe Calzaghe then, could you imagine what he would have done with Joe Calzaghe in his prime? And I would just say Joe Calzaghe wasn't in his prime when he fought Roy Jones. He's probably come to the end of his career, but you know, for me, I think Calzaghe had fast hands, but Roy Jones had faster hands and hit much harder. And always remember this. And then after that, he had the Danny Green fight where he got knocked out in a round, and I mean, you know, and then that bad fight against Denis Lebedev. I mean, these guys, Danny Green and Lebedev, these guys, when Roy Jones was, you know, dominating the light heavyweight division, dominating the super middleweight division, all right, going up and fighting the heavyweight division, these guys, these cats would never have lasted with Roy Jones. Right, I'm not saying Roy Jones was unbeatable, because obviously he's been beaten now and age catches up with you. The one thing about Roy Jones' style, it really did rely on speed and reflexes, because Roy did a lot of things that a lot of orthodox fighters can get away with. You know, he'd start, instead of some guys sat with a left jab and then throw a right hand, Roy Jones would start off throwing off with a right hand. He'd lead with a right hand, with a straight right hand. You know, he'd leap in with punches. He'd lay on the ropes and take punches. He'd pull himself out of the way of punches. You know, Roy wasn't one who rolled with punches in terms of like ducking and weaving. He wasn't one of those guys. So he relied on speed and reflexes. And when those speed and reflexes go, you are more likely to take a clean shot. So it's not a case that Roy had a weak chin. I'm never going to say Roy Jones had a weak chin. For me, I think it's because Roy's reflexes slowed down. And I don't know, again, what happened between him coming from £195 down to £175. That change on his body from £195 to £175, and even in the Tarver fight, it didn't seem, in the first fight, he didn't seem like he'd get his shots off. So, you know, he came back in the third fight, fought Tarver again, and you know, it's just sad to see, you know. And again, Roy's one of my favourite fighters. It's great to see him still commentating, and you know, there's nothing worse than seeing one of your favourite fighters, you know, one of the guys who inspire you to box, laid out on a canvas by somebody who is not even half as good as him. It's painful to watch. On the flip side, Larry Merchant has pulled out from HBO, so there's a great slot there for Roy Jones to slip himself in and work for HBO as an analyst. I think he'd be a great analyst. He's done it before, and he'd be someone that'd be great for HBO. Yeah, Roy, great fighter, man, great fighter. And you always say, you know, that those fights between Benny Eubank and Tony, nobody knows if they themselves, not Tony, what's his name? Not Tony, Michael Nunn. Nobody knows if those fighters wanted those fights. I mean, you went right up to the heavyweight division and fought. So to say you were scared, you know, them heavyweights hit hard. You and I know that. So any of these guys, these cats that will probably box or have boxed at middleweight, go and try and go in a ring and spar with a heavyweight. It's not easy. And so, you know, you did it, and you went and fought and won a world title there, and that's no easy. It's no easy feat. So yeah, so if it is the end of Roy Jones in terms of retirement and him being in the ring as a fighter, well, Roy, from me to you, salute you. Sir Roy Jones Jr., Superman.